he talked about how horrible it was. He talked about witnessing attendants holding women down, trying to drown them. And I mean, story after story. One of the stories I tell was about a nun who had been committed to the institution and had been trying to get out, Sister Mary. And Reverend French knew Sister Mary, and he knew her because in going through his rounds, he found her locked in a closet. And when he let her out, she had clearly been beaten in some way.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to the Another Nobody Show with me, your favorite nobody, Travis Myers. Today returns the great author Stacy Horn. We had her on a few months ago where we talked about her book, The Killing Fields of East New York, and we have her back today to talk about another one of my favorite books, Damnation Island. So, that's it. Nobody wants to listen to me. Let's get with Stacy. Stacy Horn, how are you, my friend?
I'm great.
Good. So good to see you again. I'm so glad you decided to join us. And
Always a pleasure.
oh, it was. I really enjoyed our last visit. I truly did, and I truly loved. I'm gonna pick it up since I have it here. The Killing Fields, which was our last visit. I don't know, 3 months ago, maybe a little bit more. And since then, I was so turned on by your book that I picked up Damnation Island, which we're going to talk about today.
Great.
So let's talk about it. It's a great read. I loved it. And just as you did with The Killing Fields, The Killing Fields of East New York, is you take a true crime story, or in this case, more of a, I guess we'd call it a historical story, a historical, almost textbook type story, but add so much depth and personality to it that to me it almost reads like a novel. I mean, I just loved it. I loved all the characters. I loved everything about it.
It is kind of a true crime story, but the city committed the crime.
Yes, and sadly, like so many things, which we're going to get into, it wasn't necessarily, shall we say, like an intentional crime. It's the way that things work out, and it's happening today. It's happening all over New York City. It's happening all over the country today, and I don't think many of these problems are ever going to be solved. They just kind of seem to get shifted around. But, well, let's get into it. So, first of all, we're talking Damnation Island for our listeners. We're talking about Blackwell's Island, which is what it was called at the time, but now everybody knows as Roosevelt Island. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. And what inspired you, or what got you started on this particular book and subject?
Well, actually, it's kind of a little bit of roundabout story, but I wanted to write a book about the municipal archives. That's the department which stores the records of the city of New York.
Yes.
And just because if you're a history buff or an amateur historian, this place is just it's like a treasure chest. It's every time I go there to research something, I end up like going down it's like searching the internet. You go down all these rabbit holes because there's just so many interesting stories. And I love going there. It's just so much fun. So I wanted to write a book about the municipal archives, and my plan was to just show how you go to look at one collection which leads to another collection, and just how it happens, and give examples of the fun stuff that you can find there. So I wrote a proposal showing that, and one of the editors looked at it, and there was one piece about a story from Blackwell's Island. It was a story about a little boy who had been found wandering the streets of New York, and in terrible condition. In the description, it says his leg was starting to rot off of his body. He was in that bad condition. And he ended up being sent to Blackwell's Island. And my editor thought that was the most interesting story that I presented. And they said, why don't you just write a book about Blackwell's Island? And I kind of went, oh, that's a great idea, actually. I didn't know a lot about Blackwell's Island. Like, I knew in the 19th century, bad things happened there, but I really didn't have any sense of why did I think that? What exactly did happen there? So of course I just said, Yeah, that's great idea. I'll do that, and that's how it came. I came to write this book.
Cool, cool. And well, I'm really glad that you landed there because it was. I guess it was not your intention to land there. So,
No.
all right.
Do you
Well,
want me to talk what? So
well,
say what?
yeah. Give us all a little, better your words than mine. An overview of Damnation Island.
So I think most people have heard Bellevue. They're familiar with Bellevue, which
Yes.
is a public hospital in New York. In the 19th century, Bellevue existed, but it was a whole complex and it wasn't just a hospital. It was also where the city had the almshouse for the poor, what they called a lunatic asylum,
Hmm.
and two prisons, the penitentiary and the workhouse. And the workhouse was a prison for people who were convicted of misdemeanors. And they were all overcrowded and inhumane, and the press printed story after story about all the terrible things that happened there. And the city recognized that they weren't doing a good job with any of them. So they bought Blackwell's Island, which was this 2.5 mile long, is this 2.5 mile long in the East River, which at the time was owned by the Blackwell's family. And it was this beautiful, lush, picturesque island with fruit trees and greenery. And so their idea was they're going to just clean slate, start over. We're going to rebuild, a lunatic asylum, hospitals, and I should say this is all for poor. They were all public
Yes.
institutions. So, like, if someone had was diagnosed with mental issues, they would go to a private hospital if they could afford to. So this was
Yes.
for people who could not afford private.
Well, in
So
fact,
they
I believe you. I know that there were several, but I know there's one that you mentioned. I believe it was on 110th Street in Harlem.
Yes. And
Yes.
of course, my mind is blanking on what the name was. And it wasn't much better, by the way. Well, I should actually, it was a lot better. It wasn't deadly in the way that the lunatic asylum was. But it still wasn't a pleasant place to go because they really didn't know a lot about treating mental illness at the
Correct.
time. So they rebuilt all these institutions: the lunatic asylum, the almshouse, the penitentiary, the workhouse, and hospitals. And they, before they did anything, they researched it. The how we treat mental illness was starting to change around the world, and they visited hospitals in Europe that were following something called moral treatment. So they used to, the people suffering from mental illness were thrown in jails, locked up in solitary. It was completely inhumane. And moral treatment, it wasn't all that revolutionary, but mainly it was, let's just treat them humanely and maybe that will help them get better.
Correct. Well,
So,
and not to cut you off at all, but quite often at that time, and please correct me if I'm wrong or misspeaking. A lot of it too was, often done through faith, through religion,
yes.
as opposed to, again, the science that we now have for mental illness, which again, even today, is not always correct, and still with the things that now seem like complete lunacy, like bloodletting, um, uh, different transfusions, putting other things other than drugs or narcotics. I know there was a bit that you had written about milk transfusions or something ridiculous like
That
that.
was actually different. That was it. But yeah, everything that they came up with, they had like this water treatment that was pretty much waterboarding. and,
Yes,
and so torture.
yes,
So yeah, and so they had this plan, like, we're going to build state of the art institutions, and this applied to both the hospitals and the prisons. We're going to do everything better, and we're going to take them off Manhattan Island, away from temptation, and put them in this beautiful pastoral place that will be peaceful and calming. And it all went south almost immediately. I've got this quote from Charles Dickens, who visited, I forget, but it was maybe 2 years after the lunatic asylum went up, and he says it's like the things that he described in his books.
yes.
I have the quote, I think, somewhere. Um, no, I do not. But he basically, it was as horrible as the stuff in my novels.
Yes.
And so this is a book about just what went on inside these institutions and why it went bad and what they did or did not do about it.
Yeah, and again, just as we get on with some of these ridiculous stories, um, I'd like to point out to our listeners again that they were done with the best of intentions.
Yeah.
As you say, this at the time was, the most progressive thinking people saying, "What can we do that's going to be really, really great for these poor, insane, ill, and even as far as things like the workhouse itself, um, it was meant more of as a slap on the wrist. If I'm not mistaken, people that got sent to the workhouse only went for 10 days. Correct? Was that
Usually,
usually?
yeah. They really I read these proposals that they wrote, like why they were very New York City was very proud of being New York City, and then why don't
Hmm.
we have institutions worthy of our great city?
Yeah. Now with these again, I'm not going to be able to remember all of them, and I know even you said yourself there were many, many because there were institutions within institutions, but we had the lunatic asylum, we had the hospital, we had the penitentiary, we had the workhouse, we had
Almshouse is the
the
last
the,
one.
the alms
Almshouse, that was
alms house,
basically a home for the poor.
home for the poor, where they could. It was almost kind of like the idea. It's kind of like a retirement home for people who simply couldn't take care of themselves anymore. Of these, which in your opinion was the worst? Because when you read the book, they're all pretty awful, or I should say, turned pretty awful. Again, that I hate. We are beaten up on it for what it ended up being, but it was a great idea at the time.
I would just like to first say, I thought, I researched and tried to, condense why they went wrong in a quick way that would be easy to understand. And I narrowed it down to four fatal flaws, what I call fatal flaws. And the first one was they underestimated the number of people that they would need
Yes,
to care for in every institution.
yes,
They like the lunatic asylum, it was first built. The building design was going to be a square shaped building with an inner courtyard, and they ended up, just doing one corner of it. So it was only, I think, 200 people was the most that it was supposed to house. And
yeah,
on the first day that it opened, it was already overcrowded.
yes,
And what they did for the lunatic asylum was they just started building built more buildings to put the people in, but they threw them up quickly and did a poor job. They were just these wooden shanties, really,
yes,
that were ended up becoming the most notorious parts of the lunatic asylum, and we'll get to that. So the second flaw was that they underestimated the cost, and this is something that we still do today. To do anything, any to serve
absolutely,
any population, really,
absolutely,
it's expensive.
yes,
So it's not that the people who work there do a bad job or that the people who go there are incorrigible and can't be helped. It's we never put enough money into it. And the money's there. And in the 19th century, and this is becoming a problem again today, the people who ran the institutions were political appointees. They were put in these positions because somebody owed somebody a favor,
yes,
not because they had any expertise. And the last one was this idea that they had of bringing everyone and putting them to taking them off Manhattan Island and putting them onto Blackwell's Island, which sounded like a good idea, ended up being a terrible idea. And the reason was, and I'm sure this already existed to some extent, but it really cemented in people's minds that poor people and criminals are really one and the same, and including the mentally ill. The mentally ill are dangerous and should be feared, and poor people are really thieves in disguise. So it just now this is a completely a thing, and it would come up again and again. Uh, in the history of the island. Like, I have a prison warden. I mean, not typically known as the most compassionate of people, though I found compassionate prison wardens say, like, we talked about how these institutions were really meant for poor people, and I should say low income people, but the prisons, that was not the case. Like, that should just be anybody who committed a crime, rich or poor.
Yes.
But the wealthy were never sent, almost rarely sent to Blackwell's Island. And the warden even commented on that. He said, like, we know wealthy people commit crimes too, so why are you never sending them to me?
Yes, and that actually happened early in the book, so I'm going to assume it's fairly early in his career as the warden, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, well, we have a long history of absolving the rich of any crimes that they commit, but
Yes.
going after the poor for all the crimes that they commit, no matter how tiny.
Yes. Well,
So,
things haven't changed there.
so about 40 to 50,000 people were sent to Blackwell's Island a year, but on any one day there was about 7,000 people on
And, and
Blackwell's Island.
and how many was it designed to hold? Do you know that number?
A lot less than
A
that.
lot less. Right.
And about 1,000 people died there every
Right.
year. So it really was a death sentence for a lot of people. So yeah. So surprisingly, to me anyway, when I was researching the book, the lunatic asylum was the deadliest. It had the highest mortality rate of any institution on the island, with the
Hmm.
exception of the hospital, which you would think would be the highest. But on many years, more people died in the lunatic asylum than the hospital. And the reason for it is always comes back to money. Uh,
Correct.
right from the start, the wardens and the people who were running the institutions had to do everything that they could to cut corners. And one of the things they did to cut corners in the lunatic asylum was, they, instead of hiring people to come in to work as nurses and attendants, they used people who were convicted of crimes and sent to the workhouse. So essentially, convicts were
Correct.
working as nurses and attendants, which is not to say that all the people being sent to the workhouse were brutal. Sometimes a lot of people who were sent to the workhouse were innocent and shouldn't have gone there at all, or committed a very minor crime. But still, it resulted in horror story after horror story.
Well, and regardless of how kind or unkind they may be, they were completely unqualified to be working as nurses and
Absolutely.
interacting with people. And again, when we're talking about, lunatics, crazy people, mentally disabled, whatever word you want to use, they need professional help, you
Yeah.
know? They need somebody that has an idea. And even if it is a very cursory training, that's why we have LPNs, licensed practical nurses, and then there's the next step up to the RN. And then there's the steps up after that I don't know what they are, but there are different degrees and grades of nurses. And here you have common people who were just literally 2 weeks ago locked up for petty theft or
No, no, no.
jaywalking or whatever.
These were people that were currently serving their sentences.
Oh no, that's what I'm saying. They were
Yeah.
they were just recent. They came off the street
Yeah.
as criminals. All right, regardless of what how bad their crime may have been or not been. But now here they are, uh, serving as nurses for
Yeah.
people who are insane.
And one of the examples of how badly that worked out was one of the things they did. So this is the 19th century. There's
Hmm.
no running water. So whenever someone was admitted, there was this whole admissions process. They come in, they were supposed to be seen by a doctor, evaluated, and sent to the part of the lunatic asylum that suited what their diagnosis was. Like, there was places for people who were gentle and not aggressive or dangerous, and then there was a part of the asylum that was for people who were considered dangerous.
Yes.
and they were supposed to get a nice hot bath, a set of clean clothes, and a room with a window and a nice, comfy bed, and only one person to a room. And because it was immediately overcrowded and they didn't have enough money. In reality, it was 4 to 5 women to a room. Oh, I should say, in the beginning of the 19th century, it was men and women in the asylum. But at a certain point, they opened another asylum on a different island, and the asylum on Blackwell's Island was women only.
Yes.
So they would put 4 to 5 women in a room, and then they would lock them up in the evening, and they would not unlock that room in all the rooms until the next morning, and that led to another problem. But
Well, I know I had read about a couple of homicides that happened because, of
I'll
course,
talk
they were all
about
locked
that.
up together.
But I
And
wanted to talk about the bath. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
that's where I was going. Because when you mentioned it, our listeners can't see. I shouldn't say a smile came over my face. I'm not happy about this part.
No.
But I'm like, she's going to talk about the baths. Because the baths, funny enough, is all of us living here in the 20, well, now the 21st century, I couldn't think of really one of the most disturbing things is how you described the baths. And so I'm gonna stop right here and let you describe the situation with the baths or being bathed. Was this was their initial intake, but it was also
Yes.
weekly, their weekly baths, correct?
Well, if no, there weren't weekly baths.
They weren't weekly.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say this, because that was another section that I worked very hard on, because I thought, I don't, I want to make sure people realize just how terrible this was.
Yes.
And to keep in mind that these are people who are at the lowest point of their lives. They're suffering from something that is making them unable to take care of themselves, and they need help. Above all, they need help. They need relief of some sort. So, because there was no running water, they would have to go back and forth, bucket by bucket, heat it up, fill up these baths, and they very quickly realized, we can't do this all day long. We don't have enough manpower. It would take, everybody in the asylum
Hmm.
constantly filling and unfilling these baths. So they would fill them up once in the morning, and that was it. No, everyone who got bathed that day. And so there was, like, I think 5 or 7 tubs. Everybody would get bathed in the same tubs. And I found descriptions, and like, oh yeah, I do have that. I read a number of people describe what this was like, and this one guy said that after a while the water became more sludge than water, and it would, in short time, become somewhat thick, if not lively. And what he meant was, whatever vermin,
Lively.
lice,
Yes.
would be in this bath. So imagine you're suffering from whatever, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, and you're taken away from your home, put on a boat, taken to this island, stripped naked by convicts,
Hmm.
and you look into that bath, which is sludge and with things moving around in it, and they're like, get in.
Yes.
I mean, I can't even picture. And if you don't get in, you're going to have these convicts manhandle you and put you in there and
Yep.
hold you down.
Hmm.
And that's your introduction to the lunatic asylum. That's your introduction to the care that was offered to you.
To me, Stacy, that's where it turned really into a horror movie for me. Just imagining that and knowing that it's true, knowing for a fact that it's true, and that you had no choice. It was just what a nightmare, what a nightmare. And I know, and I don't know, maybe I'm being a little chauvinistic, but I just think even worse for a woman than a man. You know, just what a thing to put a woman through.
I can imagine it was good for
No,
anyone.
not for anybody, but it's just what a horrific scene to be forced into that ice cold. Because by then,
Yeah, yeah,
you
oh
know,
yeah, yeah.
maybe the first 2 or 3 people had a lukewarm bath, but by the time the 140th person that day was put into
Yeah.
that tub, I can't imagine.
It
Oh,
was, yeah. And all my research was like this. It was just one terrible story after another. Like, one of the things that they learned, and were going to avoid, was to limit the use of restraints in prisons and in hospitals and in asylums. It used to be that um, the inmates, I shouldn't say inmates, the patients were put in straitjackets or shackles of some
Yes.
sort. And they were going to limit that um, for all but the most aggressive patients. But because they didn't have enough attendance or help that they needed, what they ended up doing, um, this would be more or less depending on the year, but they would just essentially put all the women in restraints and keep them there for the day. So the worst story that I came across was the story of this one woman, Emma Morrison. She was a patient in the lunatic asylum and she was pregnant. And one day they put her in a straitjacket and then put her into solitary. And that was another thing, like a hospital has solitary confinement. I mean,
Yes.
what the
Yes.
hell? So she was pregnant. They put her in a straitjacket. They put her in solitary and forgot about her.
Hmm.
And she gave birth in solitary in a straitjacket. I
With
mean,
no assistance from anybody.
can you imagine? I
You
just,
can't.
it's
I can't.
just beyond belief. I couldn't find out if the child lived or died, but I can't imagine the child lived.
Well, there was a part two in. I remember now listening to this that just seemed so unbelievably horrific, where they were doing it to the women. So I'm going to assume it was in the lunatic asylum, where they would just have them all sit down on basically on church pews on hard wooden benches, and they were not allowed to move for the entire day.
Or talk to each other.
Yes, you
And
must sit
if
here and be quiet.
Yeah, and if they had to go to the bathroom, if they had somebody with some compassion that would untie them and let them up, that they could, but otherwise they would just sit and go to the bathroom on themselves.
Yes. And this is something that rather than helping anybody, if you weren't insane when you got there, you certainly were going to be insane by the time you left.
And that I heard this again and again.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. No, people did not get better there.
No. No.
So about locking them up. So another story I came across. And the wardens, by the way, every department had to issue an annual report. So I read, I don't know what, 70 years of annual reports, and they were fascinating because unlike annual reports written today, they told the truth. They said exactly
Yes.
what was going on. I think maybe because they thought no one's reading them. I don't know, but now when you read an annual report, it's like a press release. It's like a
Yes. Yes.
PR thing.
Well, it's possible they were being honest and wanted help. Who knows?
No, they did want help. It was like these wardens begging for more money, begging for more items for treatment, and it was very hard to figure out who the bad guys were because the
Well,
wardens were trying their best.
there's a thing too, and not to cut you off again, but I remember reading a part, and I can't. My numbers are going to be wrong, but it was something ridiculous where it was, I don't know, let's say 18 cents a day was spent on food for the prisoners,
Yeah.
whatever that they had done it. And then when the following year or the next year or 2 years came by when they were doing their next budget, they actually lowered it to 15 cents.
It it was something that's roughly correct. And I
And
looked
this
into
was
it.
this was certainly not, the warden. This is not the warden's fault. He's begging for more money, but the city decides, do better. Here's 15 cents, make it work.
And the wardens were unhappy, but the commissioners were proud. I had one commissioner brag that he had gotten it down to 15 cents over the
Yes.
18 cents that it was. And I looked into it. I said, well, can someone live? Is that enough? Like, I don't know. In 19th century
Sure.
dollars, is
Yeah.
that enough to feed someone? And it was no, not even close. And doctors after doctor after doctor said, you are starving these people to death. And starving someone was against the law. And I have a case in the book where someone was sent to the penitentiary for starving people in their care, and yet the city was starving people by the thousands.
Yes. Yes. Yep.
So about locking people up, I came across a story. It was in, I talked about these. They would throw up these new buildings whenever they needed more space,
Yeah.
and um, so the madhouse was the first one, and that was so bad that they eventually closed it, and that was replaced by two buildings called the Lodge and the Retreat, and that's where they put the most, what they felt were the most dangerous
Yes, I remember reading about them.
inmates. So there was, it was the evening, and the person that was in charge, I forget which building it was, I'm sorry, but the person that was in charge was a nurse, and she was an actual nurse. And I should say the whole idea of nurses was relatively new. I think it came about in the 1870s when schools started going up to train women to help doctors, and they would
Mm-hmm.
give them actual skills. So there was a nurse, and she was helped by four convicts from the workhouse, and she heard a pounding one night, and she, ran to the room, unlocked the doors because they were all locked in, and found one woman pounding another woman, beating her head in, really, with a wooden pail which they used as a chamber pot. And so there were two other women in the room, and so they're cowering away, as far as they can. But these rooms are only 10 feet by, I think, 7 feet. So the farthest away they could get from this woman with the pail murdering another woman was 10 feet. So she relocks the door, runs. There was no doctor on call. She had to call someone. A doctor had to come, and the doctor who came was a recent graduate. I think he only graduated from med school a year before. He looked at the woman, did some cursory treatment, and the nurse said, "You're not going to have her transferred to the hospital," because there was a hospital on the island. And he
Mm-hmm.
said, "No, she doesn't need it." And the nurse said, "No, she needs to go to a hospital. This is not a minor injury." And he said, "Nope, she's fine." And she died within an hour.
She died. Yes.
And so the word got out about this, and there were a lot of terrible stories in the press by this time. And an inquest was held, and they held the commissioners of the lunatic asylum responsible for all the conditions that led to this. They held the doctor responsible for not transferring the woman to the hospital. She probably still would have died, but to at least make that attempt,
To
not just
try.
leave her
Absolutely.
there. And they condemned, the commissioners, and said, "You must do something about this. You must," and they condemned the doctor. "You must do something about this." Their response: they fired the nurse.
Yeah.
That was it. And they
I
said
remember.
she was responsible because she relocked the door. And she relocked the door because what was she? There was a murderer. What was she going to do? Like,
Exactly.
and there were all these other people that could have been hurt if this woman got loose. It was like she had no good choice there.
No, not at all. I'd like to paint a little picture for our listeners now too. Um, so again, we have a room that is approximately 7 feet wide, 10 feet deep, with as many as four, if not more, women put into this thing. So I mean, they're all sleeping on the floor. They're just literally on top of each other
Yeah.
every night. Okay, and for people who do not know or understand what this was, the thing that she had beaten this other woman to death with is called a chamber pot. And for people, again, people younger than you and I who may have never heard what a chamber pot is,
Good point.
it in this case, okay, people did not have running water back in the day. So in this case, it was nothing more than a wooden bucket, a bucket made out of wood, all right, that they would shit and piss in all night, okay, until the following morning, where it would all be dumped. And probably, I'm going to guess, possibly because they'd be out of their cells during the day, it may be dumped once, maybe twice a day. Okay? Just imagine, just put yourself in that mind frame that you're going to be in this tiny, tiny room, literally having to touch one or more people all night, every night, with the stench of a wooden bucket full of piss and shit, literally feet, if not inches, away from you. And sanitary conditions be damned. There's nothing sanitary about this at all right. And then you said yourself they got bathed less than once a week in filthy water that had little bugs living in it. This is just the physical condition that they're in. Disease must have been just rampant,
Yeah.
rampant.
Well, that explains the mortality rates.
Yes, yes.
Well, partial explains the mortality rate. So that was not the only case of murder. I didn't find a lot of cases of rape, but I think those were hushed up. And there eventually, the word had gotten out. Did I write the year? I think it was 1880. The Senate had an investigation. But the problem with their investigation was they interviewed doctors and commissioners and wardens. They didn't speak to a single inmate of the asylum. The people could have told them. And they subpoenaed Reverend French. Oh, so there was the main character of my book is this Episcopal priest, Reverend William French.
You know what? Let's take a break here. I love Reverend French. I love a couple other characters too. We'll take a real quick break. We've talked a lot about how bad it is, or how bad it never gets any better. There's no better to this. But we could talk about some of the good, decent people, heroic people, if you will, who kind of fell into this as soon as we come back from the break. How's that sound?
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Give us 2 minutes, and we're going to be right back. This is a 2024 American Eagle gold coin, which I bought along with several others last year. I'm very happy to report that its value has gone up over 40% in the first year. See, I was encouraged to buy some gold by a financial advisor friend who suggested I be more diversified with my investments. She said gold and silver was a very safe place to park some money, as well as a good hedge against inflation. So I took her advice, and all I can say is I wish I had bought more, as it's been so very, very good to us so far. Now, I purchased these gold coins from the good people over at stackingboise.com, who could not have been nicer, more knowledgeable, or more helpful. Now, I'm certainly no financial expert, but I will say from experience, if you're looking to make an investment, buy yourself some gold. And some real gold that you could hold in your hand, just like this coin you see here. And if you do, then do like I did, and get with the good folks over at stackingboise.com. I'm telling you, they're good people, they took good care of me, and they'll take good care of you. Again, that's stackingboise.com. And hey, tell them Travis sent you. You are. Hey, how you doing? It's me again, another nobody, Travis Myers. And today we're going to talk whiskey. I know most of you think of me as an all-American patriotic type guy, and you are right. But when it comes to whiskey and drinking whiskey, which I do, I always go for the Irish stuff. And my choice when it comes to the Irish stuff is Powers Irish Whiskey. Established back in 1791, it's a triple distilled, oak-aged whiskey. Powers is simply magic. It also happens to be the #1 selling whiskey in Ireland, which has got to say something, because if it's good enough for the Irish, it's good enough for you. So the next time you raise a glass, fill it with Powers, and think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey there, true crime fans. Let me introduce you today to the Cold Case Initiative. The Cold Case Initiative is a foundation that donates money to smaller police agencies all over the country. It does this in order to offset the costs of scientific, forensic, and DNA testing with the hope of solving cold case homicides and other horrific violent crimes that otherwise would remain unsolved. Please, if you have it in your heart and a little money to spare, go to www.coldcaseinitiative.org. Again, that's www.coldcaseinitiative.org, and lend a hand where it truly is needed. Be a part of solving a cold case. Every little bit helps. Know that 100% of the donations that go to the Cold Case Initiative go to agencies that are desperately in need of the help. So please, if you can, do the right thing and make a donation. Thanks, and all the best, my friends. All right, everybody, we are back with my friend Stacy Horn talking about Damnation Island. And we left off just before the break. We're going to talk about Reverend French, and I'll leave it to you, Stacy. Go ahead.
So, Reverend French was an Episcopal priest, a missionary, who was assigned to Blackwell's Island. And he was there from 1872, I believe, till his death in 1895. He literally didn't show up one day and they looked into it and he died. And he would every morning he would take the ferry across to Blackwell's Island because there were no bridges in this day. The only way to get there was by ferry. And he would walk the length of the island, going from institution to institution, trying to offer solace and caring to the people there. And I used him as my main character, one, because I liked him so much. He also wrote annual reports, and he would talk about what he came across in each of the institutions. But he was coming at it from a different point of view. He was coming from a point of view as someone who's trying to help these people. He didn't work for the city, so I said the wardens told the truth, and they did, but Reverend French told a different kind of truth.
And he actually lived it too. Something that a lot of times I think people don't realize, even though we all do it. He spent more time on that island, with these people. Granted, there were many different people in many different institutions, but he spent more time with these people than he did at home.
Yeah.
This was his life for 23 years.
And he talked to them, he got to know them, and he always carried in his pocket some sort of food treat like fruit or candy, because they never had anything like this. I mean, you think about having terrible meals, but even that, never having any kind of treat. And he'd always have something.
Mm-hmm.
And he paid for this out of his own pocket, which he got in trouble for later, which I write about. So there was this Senate investigation where they talked to the wardens and attendants and nurses, but not to any inmates. But they did subpoena Reverend French, and the Episcopal diocese said, if you go there, you're fired. And he went there anyway.
Because he was a good man.
But the thing was, they didn't believe him. He talked about how horrible it was. He talked about witnessing attendants holding women down, trying to drown them. And I mean, story after story. One of the stories I tell was about a nun who had been committed to the institution and had been trying to get out, Sister Mary. And Reverend French knew Sister Mary, and he knew her because in going through his rounds, he found her locked in a closet. And when he let her out, she had clearly been beaten in some way. Her face was bruised and bloody, and hair had been pulled out. And he knew what had happened. And he said the biggest problem were the nurses. He said the nurses, to keep these women cowed, were beating them and abusing them. And when the inmates complained, the wardens always believed the nurses over the inmates, and they didn't believe Reverend French either.
And a reminder that the majority of these nurses were all inmates themselves.
Of the workhouse.
Yes.
So at one point, a warden said, okay, I'm going to keep an accidents book to keep track of all the injuries that the inmates were suffering. But the problem was the people keeping the accident books, the accidents, were the people causing the accidents. So I loved Reverend French, and it was not an easy job. It was a terribly depressing job. So one section of the book. So all throughout his annual reports, he would say, he was only human. He wanted so desperately to know that he was making a difference, because since nobody believed him and he had limited resources, he wasn't sure that he was, with all that he tried, that he was helping anyone, there was any point to his existence there at all. And you look like you want to say
This,
something.
yes, because this is where you're going to go to one of my favorite parts of the book, I think, with Reverend French. And you did a good thing in that too, where he was almost doubting his faith at this time. He had just had enough. He had so much misery that he had witnessed over the years and despair because he felt he couldn't help anybody. And what happened?
Yeah, for him, it felt like he was fighting like a decades long war that he could not win.
Mm-hmm.
And one day he was in the city and someone stopped him and he said, Reverend French, do you remember me? And he didn't. um, and he said, I was in the work. I think he was in the penitentiary or the workhouse. He was a prisoner, not from the lunatic asylum. He said, I was an inmate and you helped me and you
Yes.
made it bearable. And he just said all these things that he had been waiting years and years to hear. And I was just so glad he finally got that moment.
Yes, me too. I love that part. And again, it is literally, it's less than a page, whatever it is. But you feel so bad for him. You watch him go through the book. He's a thread all the way through the book, you know? And I was feeling, yeah, he's losing. Yeah, here's a pastor, a reverend, a priest, whatever the right word is. And he's beginning to lose his faith. He's like, what am I doing here? What have I
Yeah.
done for so many years?
Yeah.
And somebody said, thank you,
Yeah.
and that thank you reinvigorated him. It gave him a new lease on life for as long as he continued. And I thought that
Yeah.
was beautiful, Stacy. I really, really liked that part.
Never underestimate the power of saying thank you to someone.
No, absolutely not. I really, really enjoyed that part. Another character, and not to jump ahead
Go
of you at
ahead. Go
all
ahead.
with Reverend French, who I loved, but another one that I know I liked her, and I'm sure everybody else liked her, is Nellie Bly. All
Yeah.
right, who spent what was it the worst 10 days of her life on Blackwell's Island.
That's how she described it. Yeah. For people who don't know, Nellie Bly, I'm just checking my notes so I don't say anything or forget to say anything. Nellie Bly was a journalist who got the assignment to go undercover at the lunatic asylum. So she pretended she went out. I forget exactly what she did, but she caused a ruckus and acted like she was mentally ill. She was arrested, taken to police court, and judged that she was suffering from mental illness and put on a boat to Blackwell's Island. And she wrote a book. Well, actually, we came out as a series of articles. I believe it was a New York Sun, and which were later published in a book called 10 Days in the Madhouse. And that's when she
Hmm.
said it was the 10 worst days of her life. And she talked about all the things I write about in my book. She talks about witnessing the abuse and just how horrible it was. And the thing was, people believed her.
Yes,
She was, she wasn't retelling a story that an inmate had told her. She had experienced it herself, and it was in the newspaper, and it led again to an investigation and an inquest, and um, so the next year more money was allotted to the lunatic asylum, and she was very proud of that. And I thought, oh my God, that's great. And so I thought, oh, it'd be interesting to find out where that money went. I looked at the annual reports to see what they used that money for. So the amount of money that they spent to feed the women went at that time went from 23 cents a day to 31 cents a day. So still not enough. Um, they they condemned, I forget, I wish I had a better memory, but one of the worst buildings, it was either the lodge or the retreat. They finally condemned it. But the only building that they built better was for the nurses and not for any of the inmates. And at first, I was very angry about that. Like this is when they had nurses, and I thought, well, before that, the nurses that they hired lived in the same buildings that the patients lived, so their
right.
life was just as terrible. And I thought, well, maybe that wasn't the worst thing in the world. I'm not saying it was the best thing in the world, but it's certainly not going to make someone love their job and do a good job if they're suffering as much as the inmates. It should make them more compassionate knowing what the inmates were going through. But again,
Now, can let's back this up just a little bit now, because I know there's a change in your book where they build a nursing school
yes,
on Blackwell's Island, and then they actually have true trained nurses begin to work at all the different institutions.
yes,
Is that why they built this new property to house the new real nurses, the true
yes,
nurses? Okay,
yes. If I'm remembering correctly, yes,
because they had to make it more attractive to keep somebody there.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So at the time, uh, when the women, and this is true of everyone who was sent to any institution on Blackwell's Island, they would take away your clothes and give different clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And the different clothes were in some cases worse than what they came with. And if they had a nice coat, they would get a shawl back instead. And you know, New York winters, a freaking shawl is not enough to keep them warm. So after Nellie Bly came, they were given coats. But the thing was, the coats were made out of blankets, so they were better than a shawl, but still not great. And they bought 25 canaries, which they distributed throughout
Yes,
the
I remember that.
asylum. Which again, I thought, yeah, yes, having a canary around was nice to hear them sing, but still. And the thing that I learned after, I'm not sure if this was in the book or I learned it afterwards, but I have a diagram of the inside of the asylum, and that each section was called a hall. And so they had the nicest halls, where I think it was Hall 6 and Hall 7. I might have the numbers wrong, but this is where they put the quietest, the people suffering from the most mild form of mental illness, people that they expected would be leaving
Mm-hmm.
soon. And then they had different halls where they put progressively worse diagnosed patients. And when Nellie Bly was assigned to a place in the asylum, she was assigned to Hall 6, which was the nicest in the asylum. And if you read 10 Days in the Madhouse and you read the stories she tells of the horror and the abuses that she witnessed in Hall 6, the nicest part of the institution, it makes you wonder, oh my God, what was the worst like?
What was the
But
worst?
she
Exactly.
but she knew all about the lodge and retreat because it had been in all the papers. And so her plan was, wherever they put me, I'm going to try to get to go to be moved to the lodge and retreat so I can describe exactly what it was like. But once she saw what it was like in Hall 6, she said, "No way am I going into the lodge and retreat."
Yeah.
And where she would have literally been taking her life into her hands by doing that.
Yes, yes. Now she was a brave woman. And for another interesting twist there now for our romance fans who might be listening, there was a rumor after she had left that she had struck up a romance with a doctor from Blackwell's Island, correct?
Yeah, she had.
She never admitted to it, but did they not end up, being seen in Paris or something like that later on?
I I think the most confirming thing was said by the doctors,
Right,
but they asked him directly, and he basically confirmed it by his answer, but didn't out and out say yes.
right.
The romance did not take place, as far as I know, while she was
Oh
a
well,
patient.
she was there for such a short period of time
Yeah,
anyway. But
but they struck up a friendship, which led to a romance,
correct,
I
correct.
believe.
Yeah. So again, there's just a little bit of sunshine in this horrific story. You know.
But she would talk to that. They had conversations,
Yes.
regular conversations, and she would say to him, like this whole idea of locking up the patients at night. I mean, that you can't think that that's a good idea. And she said, just think if there was a fire in the asylum and
Yes.
you had to go from door to door to door to door to door, and we're talking many doors, many buildings. Oh, well, one building at a time. So you could never unlock all the doors enough to save all the women. So
Correct.
you've got to stop that practice. And he kind of went, yeah, good point. And in fact, there was a fire.
Yeah. Yep. That, again, to back it up a little bit, you mentioned how cold it was. And I remember reading a part of, you just want to describe it, where, because again, this is, you know, the mid 1800s when this was built. What the situation was where they would have one stove per floor, but it was in the center of the hallway, and therefore all the rooms
Yeah.
were literally 10, 15, 20 degrees colder
Yeah. There was,
than,
yeah. There
yes.
was, yeah, what there was one stove per hallway, and it would barely make that hallway warm. It was
Right.
not penetrating. The heat was not going into the room. So yeah, it was a nightmare.
And
And
there was a description you gave of one poor old fella who was literally just, freezing to death. And I don't know if it was Reverend French or one of the other guys that helped him out. I wish I could remember
well,
exactly
he
who it was.
tried to help him out, but he was limited by what he could do, and that he gave him a pair of warm socks. There was a
Yes.
scene where a priest saw him putting the socks on the old man. But that guy, I mean, eventually committed suicide, and I found many cases of people committing suicide because it was
Yes.
just so bad, and there was many felt that they would never get out of there, and that I
Yes.
found that was also true. A lot of people that were committed to the asylum never left. I mean, because they weren't getting better.
Hmm.
And I found this one doctor who took over the asylum. This is like later in the 19th century, looked at all their records to find out. He wanted to learn who's in the institution, what are their problems. And I don't have the numbers in front of me, but there was a certain percentage of women that were there and there were no records for them. So he had no idea what their diagnosis was. He had no idea how long they'd been here.
Yes.
It was just terrible. And I found, so they would do a census eventually every year of everyone who was in there. And there were many people that had been in there for decades
Mhm.
and had no hope of ever leaving.
And now Nellie Bly's expose was not the only one either. There was another fellow that came after her, right? A few years after her, and did a similar thing where he went in
I think there
undercover.
was a guy who did a similar expose of the workhouse, but
Yes.
that did not engender sympathy from
Hmm.
the public. Unfortunately, people have this feeling like if someone's in jail, they must have done something bad, and
They're
they're
there
just
for a
getting,
reason, exactly.
yeah, they're just getting what they deserve, and that's not always the case. And also, even if they did do something bad, who deserves that?
Well, that's when it comes down to, does the punishment fit the crime?
Yes,
And the workhouse in particular, these were minor, minor offenses. And it was meant to be, again, I'm sure when they decided to do this, it was not I don't believe, at least, really a for-profit thing, because you're only there for 10 days. You can never even really learn what it is that you're supposed to be working on, you know, to be an expert at it, so to speak. So production value must have been very, very low of whatever it was that they were working on in the workhouse. But my point being is, you're sent there for next to nothing of crimes, public drunkenness, and now
yeah,
you're 10 days in the workhouse where everything gets worse,
yeah.
you know?
And
And if you
also,
get in trouble again, you're going to stay an extra 10 days.
and I have to point out that again, not everybody in the workhouse were criminals. And I want to talk about two things about that. And I'm writing down so I don't forget. Uh, but the almshouse for the poor, that was supposed to be a humane institution for people who were elderly or not necessarily elderly, but who were poor and could not afford a home. And this was, but they really thought of it as an end of the life thing. So people who couldn't work anymore, and they wanted it to be like a, a nice place to go off into the sunset, that
Hmm.
it was humane. But like everything else, they had to deal with overcrowding and too many poor people.
Yes.
So they had to lower down somehow the number of people that they had to care for. So what they did was they divided the poor into two groups: worthy poor unworthy poor.
Correct.
Worthy poor were like widows, disabled veterans, and children. Unworthy poor was everyone else, and they didn't take into consideration the fact that women had very few opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there were biases against certain groups who would not be hired. Like at the time, it was the Irish. So if you were Irish, you couldn't get a job. Oh, and that was another thing I meant to bring up about the insane asylum. The biases about the insane extended to their brains. Like I have a guy that was a doctor, and at the lunatic asylum, who said that the Irish had imperfectly formed brains,
Mm-hmm.
and if they suffered from some form of mental illness, the prognosis wasn't good. And anyway, so if you did not fit into the category of worthy poor, your fact the fact that you were poor was due to some character flaw, and the city was not going to house you, and your only option was to go into the workhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And some of these people had no options. If they were older in some way and disabled, and well, not disabled, whatever reason, so they would have to get that they would have to accept being committed and
Mm-hmm.
now have a criminal record and go to the workhouse in order to have a place to live. I also discovered at a certain point that women were being arrested more than men, and the workhouse had more women than men. And I thought, oh my God, that's interesting. I mean, when are we ever arresting more women than men? So I looked into what they were being arrested for, and the crime that they were most often being arrested for was disorderly conduct. And I know you know what disorderly
Yes.
conduct was,
Yes.
but it's basically a very broadly worded statute that if you're causing any kind of trouble in public,
Mm-hmm.
the police can arrest you. But it's so broadly worded that in practice, it came to mean whatever the police and the courts wanted it to mean, and they used it to target certain groups, like the Irish and women.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think well, you read this, so I hope you found it interesting, but even though my book ends in the 19th century, I was just curious. So, because in the annual reports, they say what the arrests are for. So I looked at arrests for disorderly conducts from 1895 forward, and it changed from Irish and German to more, white Americans, and then it started going up, addressing Black Americans,
Yes.
and it went up very, very quickly, to the point where I think it was the 1941 annual report had a whole section. I believe they called it Negro commitments,
Yeah.
and it was the wardens essentially saying to the commissioners in the courts, what's going on? Like, why is this sudden huge influx of Black people? Like, are they suddenly becoming criminals, and what's going on? And Black women were being arrested at a higher degree than Black men, so they had no answers. um, yeah, it made me want to write a book about the history of the disorderly conduct law.
Sure. And well, again, it's a catch-all, as you
Yeah,
know, and quite often it is what it is. I've arrested people for disorderly conduct at the same time because you are acting disorderly,
yeah,
and we have to put you under control. But in the cases with these particular arrests, again, just simply being, public drunkenness, soliciting, where are you even soliciting? Now you're a woman and you're out at whatever 10, 11 o'clock at night on the corner by yourself, and they snatch you up, and God forbid you say the wrong thing, you
yeah.
know, and now you're off to the workhouse.
Well, that's what I want to talk about. Like they would go around and just grab any woman that was
Absolutely.
alone after
Hmm.
hours, and chances are they grabbed some women who were acting as prostitutes. But there was this whole like crusade to end prostitution in New York, and it was headed by this Reverend Parkhurst, and they were just arresting women to a huge degree. And this one activist woman said, if you are really trying to end prostitution, if this is really your aim, arrest every man who goes into any house of prostitution, which are called disorderly houses and various other names,
Hmm.
print their name publicly,
Yes.
and this is going to put an end to it
Yep.
very quickly. But
Yep.
no, they're basically arresting the victim. These women who I'm sure are not thrilled to be prostitutes, but are doing it because they've got few other options at the
Yes.
time.
Yes. Now, prostitution is a heartbreaking world. I mean, we won't go off on a tangent here, but it's something that is, I truly believe. All right. Although there are uh, um, outliers there, that no woman in her right mind ever wants to be a prostitute. It's something that is forced upon them, either outright forced upon them, or by drug use or poverty or whatever. It's just a way to survive your circumstances, you know. And it's a I cannot think of a much worse life to lead than in prostitution. I know today there's a big push by a lot of people to to whitewash it with the new phrase, sex worker. All right, I don't ascribe to that, simply because I think it is a whitewash of something that is just such a horrific life. And again, I could tell you stories of dozens of prostitutes that I know personally, um, over the years. Even not even through policing. A young woman that I grew up with became a streetwalker in New York City. Um, a good friend of mine from Boston actually moved to New York City to try to save his sister from that life. And it's such an awful way to live. And then to put on top of that, again, being scooped up by the police on a regular basis and punished for just trying to survive does not help matters at all. So I'm sorry, but go ahead.
Well, I just want to say that I support calling them sex workers, and it's a movement to decriminalize it. I'm not saying
Yes.
it's an ideal occupation and we shouldn't try to find other avenues for someone who's working as a sex worker,
Yeah.
but throwing them into prison I don't think is
Well,
the
no, it doesn't do it. It's that
whitewash
phrase
it.
is the oldest profession, because it is. It's been around forever. And personally, myself, I could care less what anybody of sound mind does with their body. If there are a very small, I'm going to say probably 0 point something percent of prostitutes choose to be prostitutes of their own free will. you know and I do think it's something that should be legalized and
Right,
run as they
that's
do in
all.
many cities around the world, where they have a red light district and everybody's checked by doctors and you have to have a permit, and et cetera,
Exactly,
et cetera, et cetera. That's
exactly.
a whole different world. We don't live in that world here in America,
Right, but
with the exception of Nevada. But go
this
ahead. I'm
is
sorry.
this is what where people are trying to move us, though, that to
Yes.
decriminalize it, don't call them prostitutes, don't throw them in jail,
Yes.
let's protect them, try to offer other opportunities, find a way to offer other
Sure.
opportunities. Okay, that's the only.
Oh, on that case, I agree with you. I'm just as a, I guess a senior citizen. I don't know. I'm so tired of having my language changed every 6 months by something else. I don't think there's anything wrong with the word prostitution if that is exactly what you're doing. And to somehow try to pretty up a really awful situation for so
Right,
many women and men
right.
too.
But yeah, and I love what you said about new words. Like every day, it's like I
Oh.
don't know what the hell you're talking about. I don't know what that means.
So, but yes, yeah. So for the most part, now we went through how many years were these institutions in place? Do you know
So
roughly?
I think the very first. I love to tell the story. So they had all these great intentions, and the
Yeah.
first institution that they built was a penitentiary. And the very first thing they did on Blackwell's Island was to schedule a double hanging, and
Yes.
that we took that out of the book, but
Mhm.
just because I have to do this with every book I write. It's like it's just too grim. Let's take
Yeah.
some stuff out. And the first thing they did was they had a double hanging. It was a very, very sad story. And but the reason they did that was public hangings used to take place in lower Manhattan,
Hmm.
and wherever they were, the public would like destroy that area. They pull down fences,
Sure.
trample, and the
Well,
city would have to
there
pay.
is a tree that still stands in Washington Square
Yeah,
Park. You know where I'm going,
yeah,
which is, I don't know if there's a record or of exactly how many hundreds and hundreds, if not more, hangings took place there. But it's wild to me that that tree still is still there. You
yeah.
know, people are picnicking under it right now as we speak. You know, and hundreds of people were hung by that tree. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, no, it's okay. I know, yeah, the public hangings were in Manhattan. So they scheduled this public hanging, and the idea was to keep it away from the public, that it would be a private affair. And because you couldn't, the only way you could get to Blackwell's Island again was by boat. And I read all these accounts of that hanging, and people still tried to get on the island. So it was on the northern end of Blackwell's Island, and so that area was teeming with everyone who owned any kind of boat trying to get a look at this hanging. And when the people dropped, everybody like stood up on their boats to get a better look, and on the smaller boats, they went into the water, and all the newspapers accounts said that like I think 5 or 6 people died by drowning trying to get a better look at the hanging, but I couldn't confirm any of those deaths. So I
Right,
think
right.
they were just goosing the stories.
Oh, as they always do. As they
No,
always
they don't.
I've every time I've been in the paper, all right, which is probably a good 12 times at least, all right? And these are, incidents that had to do with me directly or just things that I was involved in. Never once did the newspaper have it right. Not once.
It's interesting that you said I tried very, very hard. I fact checked to an nth degree to make sure, and I try to confirm, like I did with this story. Did anyone really die? I
Right.
tried to find death records, and I didn't. But when I wrote the book, The Restless Sleep, about the NYPD's cold case squad,
Hmm.
and while I was writing that book, I would read everything in the newspapers and all the New York newspapers about what the NYPD was doing whenever a murder happened. So this was like the Daily News, the New York Post, the New York Times. I think that's it. Just those three. And so I would read 3 different accounts of what happened. And because I was like always with the detectives, I knew what the inside story
Yeah.
was. And the so I would see when they got it right or got it wrong or exaggerated. And the you're gonna hate me, but the New York Times was best. But they, in terms of not exaggerating or making
Yes.
stuff up, but the Daily News was good, and the Post was kind of bad. Except there was one guy who was good, and I thought he's got a good inside connection because he's kind of getting it right. Larry Salona. Do you
Mm,
recognize that name?
not right off the bat, no.
Anyway,
But this would have been years
something
ago.
like that.
He'd
Yeah.
be an older fella anyway, right?
Yes, yes. This was like I was writing this around 2001, so
Right.
almost 25 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah, that doesn't ring a bell. But it's true. I mean, every time, and I'm sure it's an impossible job anyway.
Well, that's what
You have to write a story and you get, tidbits of information to string together. And something that any detective will tell you anyway, there's always
but they're
3 sides of the
really,
story. Yours, mine, and the truth lies in the middle, you know? So,
I've learned, yes, yes. I, this is like a side story, but I run this social network called Echo. I've been running it since 1990.
mhm,
And when people get online, they act pretty much how they do offline, and they don't always behave well. There's fights and disagreements and problems. And because I was like the mayor of this small, social town, when people couldn't come to any kind of consensus or agreement or stop fighting, I was like called in to do something about it.
to moderate it, right?
Yes, exactly. And I would talk to everyone involved, and I would get a different story. Like
Yes.
everyone had their own point of view. And I'll never forget, I was talking to this one person where these two people said, she started screaming at me. No, she started screaming first. And I'm like, I was like, and it was more than two people. And I remember saying to a friend, how do I figure out who screamed? And he goes, they probably all screamed. And I went, yeah. But yeah, finding the truth is very, very difficult. And
Correct.
finding the truth on a daily basis, like you have to churn out these stories. I couldn't do it. I would never, ever work for a newspaper. It would just kill me. And like with a book, I have years to get to the bottom of it. Like, and
Yes.
even I can't find out.
With these books now, with both The Killing Fields of East New York and Damnation Island, how much time goes in to writing a book like this?
5 years. I
Five years.
should say four. There's a couple of years of research, writing, and then it's another year before the book comes out.
Right. Wow.
And I'm constantly tinkering. Like with Killing Fields, I've gotten feedback from people who've grown up in New York, police, all sorts of, I think you missed this, you should talk about this. And for the paperback, there's going to be a few like tweaks where I
Hmm.
take into account like people telling me things. There's a guy, I think you know him. I think you said you've interviewed him or you're going to, Peter Moskos.
Yes.
Um, he had two great lines from a former police officer about the 7-5. And I said, oh, God, I wish I had interviewed this guy. I say, if I credit you in your book, do you mind if I use these two
Yes.
sentences? He said, sure.
Good. 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 Yeah. Yeah. But again, it's got to be an impossible job to get it all right.
It
So,
really is. You do the best you can, and
well, you
it's
did, you did great with
thank
Damnation
you.
Island. You did
Thank
great. I
you.
love it. I loved every page all the way through. So now we come to the end of this story, okay, and it's all over. And then, what does the city do next? They have to do something new, and we create or buy or build Rikers Island, which is still today's jail.
Yes. So the city
And let
recognized.
me, just so people understand, I don't want to interrupt you, okay, but I'm going to again anyway. Um, but what people don't realize about Rikers Island also, Rikers Island is not a penitentiary. It is the city's jail, okay? And there is a difference. Penitentiary is when you go away, you go to do time. You're going to go for years. The city jail, the reason Rikers Island has such a reputation and why it is so very, very big is because it's New York City's jail. And New York City being the most populous city in the United States needs a big ass jail to house everybody. It's not the only jail. There's still the Manhattan House of Detention, Brooklyn House of Detention. Everybody has another jail around. But the idea of Rikers Island is it's to hold you before trial and before sentencing to be sent off to a true prison. And I'm sorry, I'm just saying that so people that have no idea what we're talking about have an idea that it is literally the city, the town of New York's jail is Rikers Island. It's not a major penitentiary, even though it's larger than some penitentiaries in the country. So,
It did have prisons at first, though. It did have a penitentiary and a workhouse.
oh, in the beginning,
At
yes,
first, yes.
yes, yes.
So, and I wanted, you were saying how big it was, and I just wanted to say the workhouse at Blackwell's Island was the biggest prison in the United States at the time, and 20 to 33,000 people were sent there yearly.
Wow.
Oh, and about the sentences, at one point you said the sentences were 5 days, and that was the case, 5 to 10 days usually, unless you were a woman, and then they were like 3 to 5 months. Women,
Yes, I remember reading that. I do
they got
remember reading
higher
that.
fines and longer sentences, and I have this one case that broke my heart. This being the 19th century, there were regular outbreaks of smallpox, cholera, and the the people on Blackwell's Island would suffer the worst because at the time they didn't know what the causes of these were, and part of them was bacteria and germs. My mind is blanking, but we know now. Um, but everything that would make an outbreak worse existed on Blackwell's Island. Um, the conditions in the lunatic asylum that you described, the chamber buckets. So even though there would be outbreaks and the outbreaks would be worse, they would still continue to send people who had been convicted of crimes to Blackwell's Island, knowing that there was a current outbreak, which was terrible. It was going on everywhere in Manhattan, but it was worse on Blackwell's Island. And I tell the story of Fannie Little, who was arrested for disorderly conduct. And I forget if she was sentenced to 3 months or 5 months, but like 1 week before she was about to be released, discharged, she came down with smallpox and died.
Yeah.
So, had she gotten a more humane, fair sentence, she would have lived. But no, it killed her.
Yep. And that happened to literally thousands of people
Oh, yeah.
over the years. Thousands of people.
So, Rikers Island. So, at a certain point, the cities realized we just made all the same mistakes that we had made when it was at Bellevue. We have to do better. So they bought Rikers Island, and the idea was they were going to build a new penitentiary, a new workhouse, and not make all these mistakes that they had made. And my book ends in 1895, and they didn't actually move to Rikers Island. They bought it in around 1895, but they didn't actually move people there until the 1930s.
Oh, it
And
took that long. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it wasn't because until essentially the convicts had taken over the penitentiary. There was like gangs who were running the place, and they had to send in like a police force to retake the penitentiary. So anyway, so they built new institutions that they did everything exactly the same, all the same mistakes. They didn't change the procedures at all. I mean, they had cleaner, nicer buildings with better facilities. They had plumbing, but I, they, I can only conclude that they seem to think the problem was in the buildings and not with the policies and procedures and how they were run.
I can see that. I can see that. No, I can. Dealing with bureaucracies, in the police department, in government, in the military, people do what they learn. It's what they've learned, and they just continue doing it. And quite often too, there are maybe small improvements, but they feel those improvements are so much bigger than they actually are. Does that make sense to you? Where
Yeah.
yes, we have improved, and next year it'll be better. Next year it'll be better, and it never gets better. It only gets worse. You know, just like the simple overcrowding situation, where you can't on Blackwell's Island, where you can't send 500 people to a building that only houses 200 people, and yet we do it year after year because where are we going to put them? It still happens today. There's nothing new about that. You know, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
I applied for a job on Rikers Island.
Did you?
It was, I forget the title, press officer, press commissioner, the person who gets up and addresses the press when anything happens and they have questions. And I thought I would be a perfect person for this job. And so at the end of the interview, I said, I would really love to have this job. And the woman looked me straight in the eye and she said, no, you don't. And she proceeded to tell me
Yes.
horror stories of what goes on in Rikers Island, and she was right. I could not handle that.
Yeah. So, well, again,
I'm a wuss.
well, some people just aren't built for it, and there's nothing wrong with that at all, Stacy. Nothing wrong with that at all. So, a little, just a side note before we leave. My wife actually used to work on Roosevelt Island at Goldwater Memorial Hospital.
Oh my God.
Yes, she was when she was going to a student at NYU. She's a dental hygienist, and she was going to the dental school there. And they would send, that was part of her training, was to go and clean teeth of people at Goldwater Memorial. And even then, I'm talking about the 1992, 1993 in that neighborhood. It was a very, very sad and depressing place to be. and it
Yeah.
still exists today. No, it didn't. No, closed in 2013,
Yeah, they've
I
been.
think.
I think there's one hospital left there, but they closed down like the penitentiary and workhouses moved to Rikers.
Yes.
The state took over the care of the people diagnosed with mental illness, and
Hmm.
they did. That was in 1895. They did a little bit better at first, and then it was became just as bad as it was when the city. You know about Geraldo Rivera's
Yes.
Willowbrook.
Yes.
For the young folks,
Yep.
Geraldo Rivera did something similar to Nellie. No, it wasn't similar to Nellie Bly. I'm thinking of someone else. But he went in undercover with a camera to Willowbrook, which was a facility on Staten Island. And
Yes.
oh my God, I think you can still see that.
Oh,
But
I've seen it. Yes, and it's a horrific situation.
it's,
That's where the I think still uncaught serial killer Cropsey was from, if I'm not mistaken,
yes,
was
I think he
from
was.
Willowbrook. You know.
I think I also my memory is similar to yours, but I'll never forget. There's this one scene of him walking down a hallway, and the hallway is lined with people sitting along the length of the hallway, naked or half dressed,
Yep.
sitting in their feces, rocking back and forth, unbathed, uncared for. It was just defied belief that this was the care that we were offering these people.
No, I've been. There was a place on Jerome Avenue in the Bronx where, and I believe it was just a daycare, if I'm not mistaken. The facility was just a daycare for mentally handicapped and disabled people. And I remember taking escapees back. You know, escapees, they would, get away, and we'd catch them and we'd take them back there
Those poor
if we
people.
knew where they would go. Otherwise, we'd have to take them to the hospital. But anyhow, going in there twice, and again, as a rough and tumble, seasoned police officer, being shocked at just what appeared to be just an awful situation with,
Yeah,
again, people just bobbing back and forth, drooling on themselves, you
yeah,
know defecating and urinating in their pants, whatever it was. Just like, wow, I can't. And just how dirty it could be. How does nobody mop up at the end of the day,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know but again, it's the lack of employees, the quality of employees, the lack of pay, the quality of
Money,
pay. We
money,
can go on. Money,
money.
exactly. We can go on and on about it, and it's just really, really, really sad, very horrific. And it still goes on today. We're telling these stories now. Believe me, 50 years from now, somebody's going to be talking about,
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know, they'll be writing about Creedmoor. Is Creedmoor still the number one place in
I
New York
don't
City?
know. I don't know.
That's
But
out in
Rikers
Queens. There's a big
Island,
place
like
in Queens.
my book ends in 1895, but I read some reports about things that go on in Rikers Island, and they made me cry.
Yes, that's prison. That's prison. And that's, all over the country. And believe it or not, there are places way, way worse than Rikers Island that you could go.
Well, this is why I
Stay out of
become.
trouble, kids. Stay out of trouble.
But even if you get into trouble, like this is not the way to deal with the people, especially the people in Rikers Island. They have not been convicted yet.
Yes, I know. I know. That's why I was trying to explain in the beginning that this is the
Yeah,
city jail.
yeah,
It's not a penitentiary yet. You've yet to be convicted. And you
yeah.
may spend months there, months, if not, over a year, awaiting trial, depending on how long it takes you to get there.
And
You know?
it's only street criminals. It's not financial criminals who are causing a lot.
Very, very rarely,
Yeah,
rarely does any white collar criminal ever see the inside of Rikers Island. Very rarely.
and
So,
their crimes are bad too, and as
absolutely.
destructive.
Yes, absolutely. Well, in my opinion, and that's maybe it is the poor street kid in me. I hold them in more contempt.
Me too.
I hold them in more contempt simply because they're doing it because they wholly want to do it.
Yeah,
There's no needing to do anything when it comes to these filthy, filthy
it's
thieves.
greed,
Be
and
it
they know the repercussions.
sure, they know
It's
better.
this is
They know better.
premeditated social destruction on a mass scale, and they literally they're on an unfettered crime spree because nobody's bringing them in.
Nope.
If Rikers Island was filled with bankers, Rikers Island would not be like it is today.
No, 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 not at all. No, and we could. I mean, bankers, congressmen,
Yeah,
senators, you name
yeah.
it. We could fill the prisons. There's something. And before we go, just like I've always said the same thing about the school system. Another book maybe you'll write someday. I always thought, why don't senators and congressmen and all city officials have to send their kids to public school?
Yeah.
Those schools would turn around like this,
Yeah.
if they had to go. You
Yeah.
know, and it's a fact. So, and the prisons would be so much nicer too if
Exactly.
they
Exactly.
had to go. So, anyway, Stacy, we're not going to solve any problems here, you and I, I'm sorry, but we get to talk about them, and I
Yeah.
love talking about them with you. All right.
I love talking about them with you as well.
I've really enjoyed these books. I'm definitely going to read. Oh, I can't think of the name of it now. The cold case book that's next on my list.
The Restless Sleep.
The Restless Sleep, which is a cool name too.
Thank you.
And hopefully you'll come visit me again when I'm done with that one.
I'd love to. I'd be glad to.
Thank you so much, dear. All right.
Thank you.
All the best. Take care now. Bye-bye. Well, there you have it, everybody. The great Stacy Horn, quickly becoming one of my favorite authors. Do yourselves a favor now. Pick yourself up a copy of Damnation Island. And while you're at it, order up a copy of The Killing Fields of East New York. You will not be disappointed. If you are a New York City history buff, these books are spot on. Now, that being said, until next time, my friends, please do the right thing. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you all again next week. All the best, my friends. Hey, how you doing? Another nobody here, Travis Myers. This one's going out in particular to all my drinking friends out there, because I got a new favorite thing, and it's called Shanky's Whip, and it is magical. It's Irish whiskey mixed with a little caramel, a little cream, a little vanilla, and it's heavenly. What more can I say? I suggest you pick up a bottle. You can have it as a shot with a cold beer, like I like. On the rocks, it's great. Mix it with a little cola. I promise you, you're going to love this stuff. Next time you raise a glass, think of me, another nobody, Travis Myers. Hey, do the right thing. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any more of my nonsense. All the best, my friends.
Buy our books!
Listen up. This one's important. I'd like to try to encourage you, please, to give to the Stephen Siller Foundation, Tunnel to Towers, at T2T.org. That's letter T, number 2, letter T.org. Do good for those who've done good for you.